In a distant corner of the galaxy, where stars burned bright and planets drifted like silent sentinels, humanity had carved out a fragile foothold among the stars. For centuries, Earth's people had dreamed of reaching beyond their blue world, and now they had done just that. But despite their achievements, humans were still seen as newcomers, weaklings compared to the older, more advanced civilizations that ruled the cosmos. The Galactic Council, an assembly of powerful alien species, often dismissed humanity as primitive and irrelevant. Yet deep within the hearts of those who remembered Earth's struggles, there burned a quiet fire of determination. William Bill Carter sat alone in his small cabin on the outskirts of a human colony planet called Haven Prime. At 72 years old, Bill was no longer the towering figure he once was during his days as a Marine. His hair had turned silver, his hands bore scars from battles long past, and his back sometimes ached when he stood too long. But his eyes, those steel gray eyes, still carried the weight of countless wars fought and won. On this particular evening, he stared out the window at the twin moons hanging low over the horizon, thinking about how much had changed since his youth. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Turning away from the view, Bill opened the door to find Margaret Maggie, Doyle standing there with her usual no-nonsense expression. Maggie was 68, a former sniper whose precision had saved entire units during some of humanity's darkest hours. She wore her graying hair tied back in a practical bun, and though she wasn't tall, her presence commanded respect. Behind her loomed Robert Bob Hayes, a hulking man even in his late 60s. Bob had been a demolitions expert in his prime, and while age had softened his edges, he still looked like someone you wouldn't want to cross. "Got a message from HQ," Maggie said without preamble, holding up a datapad. "They're calling us in." Bill raised an eyebrow. "Calling us? We've been retired for decades. What could they possibly want?" Maggie shrugged. "Don't know yet. Orders are orders, though. Suit up." The three veterans exchanged glances before heading inside. They gathered around the table as Maggie activated the datapad, projecting a holographic message into the air. A stern-faced officer appeared, his uniform crisp and immaculate. "To all surviving members of Operation Redemption," he began, referring to the legendary campaign that had secured humanity's place among the stars. "You are hereby summoned to appear before the Galactic Council at the Citadel. Your presence is required immediately." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving the room in silence. Bill leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. "What do you think?" he asked after a moment. "It's not good," Bob rumbled, crossing his arms. "If they're dragging us out of retirement, something big is going down." Maggie nodded. "Could be trouble. Or maybe they just need us to clean up another mess." Trouble or not, there was no ignoring the summons. The Galactic Council didn't make idle requests, especially not to humans. Over the years, humanity had earned a reputation for being stubborn and resourceful, but also unpredictable. While other species relied on superior technology and intellect, humans excelled in areas that couldn't be measured by numbers or algorithms. Grit, adaptability, and sheer willpower. It was these qualities that had allowed them to survive against overwhelming odds time and again. By morning, the trio was aboard a transport ship bound for the Citadel. The journey gave them plenty of time to reflect on their lives and the uncertain future ahead. Bill spent most of it staring out the viewport, watching the stars streak past in streaks of light. He thought about the battles he'd fought, the friends he'd lost, and the sacrifices made along the way. Humanity's expansion into space hadn't come easily. Every step forward had been paid for in blood and tears, and now, here they were, being called upon once more. When the ship finally docked at the Citadel, the veterans disembarked onto a sprawling landing platform surrounded by towering spires of shimmering metal. The Citadel was unlike anything they'd ever seen, a floating fortress suspended in the void between stars. Its architecture a blend of styles from across the galaxy. Alien delegates bustled about, their forms ranging from sleek and insectoid to massive and reptilian. Some moved gracefully, others lumbered, but all exuded an air of confidence that came from belonging to dominant species. As Bill, Maggie, and Bob made their way through the crowd, they couldn't help but notice the looks they received. Most aliens regarded them with disdain, their expressions suggesting they saw the humans as little more than relics of a bygone era. Bill ignored the stares, keeping his gaze fixed straight ahead. Maggie clenched her jaw, her fingers twitching, as if itching to reach for a weapon. Even Bob seemed tense, his massive frame drawing both curiosity and contempt. "They don't think we belong here," Maggie muttered under her breath. "Let them think what they want," Bill replied evenly. "We'll show them soon enough." Their guide, a diminutive alien with translucent skin and glowing veins, led them through labyrinthine corridors until they reached a grand chamber filled with rows of tiered seating. At the center stood a circular platform where representatives from each species addressed the council. Bill scanned the room, taking note of the various ambassadors. There was Xylar, a Zorathian with chitinous armor and multifaceted eyes that gleamed with arrogance. Nearby sat Ambassador Scylla, a Valen whose aquatic form shimmered beneath a layer of protective gel. Each delegate radiated power and authority, making the humans feel even more out of place. Still, Bill refused to let doubt creep in. These aliens might have superior technology, but they lacked something crucial: experience. True experience, born not from simulations or controlled environments, but from real-world combat where mistakes meant death. As the session began and tensions flared among the delegates, Bill knew one thing for certain: they hadn't seen anything yet, and neither had the Galactic Council. The grand chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with energy as Bill, Maggie, and Bob took their seats at the far end of the circular platform. The trio couldn't help but feel out of place amidst the sleek, glowing forms of alien delegates, who radiated confidence and superiority. Their own uniforms were patched and worn, relics from a time when humanity's survival depended on grit rather than glamour. Yet despite their ragged appearance, the veterans carried themselves with quiet dignity, their eyes sharp and alert. Ambassador Xylar, the Zorathian representative, was already speaking when they arrived. His voice was cold and mechanical, amplified by some unseen device in his throat. "We must address the growing instability along the outer rim," he declared, his multifaceted eyes scanning the room. "Humanity continues to encroach upon territories claimed by other species. They're reckless. Expansion threatens peace across the galaxy." A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber, and several delegates nodded in approval. Bill clenched his jaw but said nothing. He knew accusations like this weren't new. Humans had been blamed for everything from resource shortages to diplomatic failures ever since they joined the council. What bothered him most was the tone. Condescending, dismissive, as if humanity's mere presence was an inconvenience. Maggie leaned closer to Bill, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're setting us up," she muttered. "This isn't about territory, it's about making us look weak." Bill gave a slight nod. "Let them talk," he replied under his breath. "Words don't win wars." As the session continued, other ambassadors chimed in, each adding fuel to the fire. Ambassador Scylla, the Valen, floated gracefully to the center of the platform, her translucent body shimmering under the chamber's artificial light. "While I share concerns about human activity," she began in a melodic voice, "we must also consider the broader implications. Tensions are rising not just because of one species, but because trust among all member races is eroding." Her words sounded reasonable enough, but Bill caught the subtle dig beneath the surface. Trust, or lack thereof, was always the excuse, used to justify hostility. He glanced at Maggie and Bob, both of whom sat stone-faced, refusing to rise to the bait. They had learned long ago that reacting impulsively only played into their enemy's hands. Finally, it was the turn of the council's presiding officer, a towering alien known as Chancellor Vorak. His species, the Krill, were infamous for their imposing stature and unyielding demeanor. Standing nearly 12 feet tall, with skin like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed faintly red, Vorak commanded attention simply by entering the room. When he spoke, his deep voice echoed like rolling thunder. "The council has summoned." Representatives from all member races to resolve these disputes, Vorak announced. But before we proceed, let us remind ourselves of our shared goal, maintaining order and preventing conflict. To that end, we will hear testimony from each faction and evaluate their claims accordingly. With a wave of his massive hand, Vorak signaled for the first speaker to step forward. It came as no surprise when Xylar rose again, his chitinous armor clinking softly as he moved. This time, however, his focus was squarely on the humans. Striding to the center of the platform, he pointed a claw-like finger directly at Bill. "Your kind is obsolete," Xylar sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You cling to your primitive weapons and outdated tactics while the rest of us evolve. Your presence here is an insult to progress." The chamber erupted in murmurs of agreement, and several delegates exchanged smug glances. Even Chancellor Vorak seemed unmoved, his expression unreadable behind layers of stoicism. For a moment it felt as though the entire galaxy had turned against them. But Bill didn't flinch. Instead, he slowly leaned forward in his seat, fixing Xylar with a steely gaze. "Evolution doesn't mean much," he said calmly, his voice carrying clearly despite the noise. "If you can't survive the fight." His words landed like a hammer blow, silencing the room instantly. Every eye turned toward him, including those of the aliens who had moments earlier dismissed him as irrelevant. Bill held Xylar's glare without blinking, his posture relaxed yet commanding. Beside him, Maggie and Bob exchanged brief smiles. They recognized that tone. It was the same one Bill used during briefings before major battles when he needed to cut through fear and doubt. Xylar hesitated, clearly caught off guard. Recovering quickly, he snapped back. "Survival? You speak of survival? Your kind barely survived infancy compared to the millennia my people have endured. What makes you think you deserve a seat among equals?" Bill stood slowly, his movements deliberate. Though shorter than many of the delegates, his presence filled the room. "Because," he said, his voice steady and firm, "we've earned it. Humanity didn't get where we are today by waiting for handouts or hiding behind superior tech. We fought. For every inch of ground, for every breath of air, for every chance to prove ourselves. And we're still here." For a long moment, no one spoke. The tension in the chamber was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Then, unexpectedly, a low chuckle broke the silence. It came from Ambassador Scylla, who floated serenely near the edge of the platform. Her melodic laughter rang out, drawing startled looks from the others. "I admit," she said, addressing the room, "there is something admirable about their spirit. Perhaps we have underestimated them." Her comment sparked a flurry of whispered conversations among the delegates. Some nodded thoughtfully while others frowned, unwilling to concede even an ounce of respect. Chancellor Vorak raised a hand, restoring order with a single gesture. "Enough," he rumbled. "Accusations and posturing will not solve our problems. If we are to assess the capabilities of each race, then let us do so objectively. Tomorrow, we shall hold demonstrations of military prowess. Each species will showcase their strength and, perhaps, reveal truths hidden beneath rhetoric." The announcement sent shockwaves through the chamber. Demonstrations were rare, reserved only for critical situations where proof of power outweighed diplomacy. For the humans, it meant walking into a lion's den armed with little more than courage and experience. But Bill wasn't worried. In fact, a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. As the session adjourned and the delegates filed out, Maggie nudged Bill gently. "Think they'll underestimate us again?" she asked, her tone laced with mischief. "Oh, absolutely," Bill replied, his grin widening. "And that's exactly what we want." That night, the three veterans gathered in their assigned quarters to plan their approach. The room was modest but functional, with holographic displays projecting maps and tactical data onto the walls. Bob paced back and forth, his large frame casting shadows across the floor. "So, what's the play?" he asked, stopping briefly to glance at the others. "We keep it simple," Bill answered, leaning over a table covered in schematics. "No fancy tricks, no reliance on tech we don't have. Just good old-fashioned teamwork." Maggie nodded, her sharp eyes scanning the diagrams. We'll use the terrain to our advantage, hit hard, hit fast, and make sure they remember why humanity earned its place here. Bob cracked his knuckles, a mischievous glint in his eye. Sounds like fun. Been a while since we taught someone a lesson. Bill chuckled softly, though his expression remained serious. Remember, this isn't just about us. It's about showing the galaxy that humanity isn't afraid to stand up for itself, or for what's right. The following morning, the atmosphere in the demonstration arena was electric. Delegates from every species filled the stands, eager to see how the humans would fare against opponents equipped with cutting-edge technology. Xylar watched from the front row, his mandibles twitching in anticipation. Even Chancellor Vorak observed silently, his glowing eyes betraying nothing. When Bill, Maggie, and Bob entered the arena, clad in their battered uniforms and carrying standard-issue rifles, the crowd erupted in laughter. To the assembled aliens, the sight was almost comical. A trio of elderly humans daring to face warriors decades younger and infinitely better equipped. But as the veterans took their positions, their calm demeanor told a different story. The opposing team consisted of elite soldiers from the Zerathians, Valans, and another advanced species known as the Thalaxians. Clad in shimmering armor and wielding energy weapons capable of disintegrating targets in seconds, they exuded confidence. The referee, a neutral Krill overseer, raised a hand to signal the start of the match. What followed was nothing short of extraordinary. Bill led the charge, darting between cover points with surprising agility for a man his age. Maggie provided precise covering fire, picking off enemy combatants with uncanny accuracy. Bob, meanwhile, executed a series of bold flanking maneuvers that left the opposition scrambling to regroup. Within minutes, the tide of battle shifted dramatically. By the time the demonstration ended, the arena was deathly silent. The alien soldiers lay defeated, their superior gear rendered useless against the veterans' cunning strategies. The crowd stared in disbelief as Bill, Maggie, and Bob stood victorious, their breathing steady and their expressions calm. Even Xylar looked shaken, his usual arrogance replaced by unease. Chancellor Vorak rose from his seat, his towering form casting a shadow over the arena. "Impressive," he intoned, his voice resonating like distant thunder. "It seems there is more to humanity than meets the eye." The aftermath of the demonstration left the Galactic Council chamber buzzing with a mix of awe, disbelief, and unease. The veterans, Bill, Maggie, and Bob, had returned to their seats, their expressions calm but alert. They knew the battle in the arena was only the beginning. While their victory had silenced some critics, it had also stirred suspicion among others. Whispers rippled through the room as delegates leaned close to one another, discussing what they had just witnessed. Some praised the humans' ingenuity. Others questioned whether such tactics could truly hold up against real threats. Ambassador Xylar, however, wasn't willing to let the matter rest. His chitinous armor clicked softly as he rose once more, his multifaceted eyes narrowing in frustration. He had underestimated the humans, and now he needed to regain control of the narrative. Striding to the center of the platform, he addressed Chancellor Vorak directly. "These performances," Xylar began, his voice laced with disdain, "prove nothing beyond brute force and clever tricks. Humanity's so-called strength is irrelevant in the face of true challenges. What we need are solutions, not parlor games." Maggie rolled her eyes, leaning back in her seat. "Parlor games?" she muttered under her breath. "If that's what he wants to call getting his tail handed to him, fine by me." Bill shot her a quick glance, silently urging caution. While Xylar's words were clearly meant to provoke, Bill knew better than to rise to the bait. Instead, he focused on the bigger picture. Something about this situation didn't sit right with him. Why had the Council summoned them here? And why were tensions between species escalating so rapidly? There had to be more going on beneath the surface. Chancellor Vorak raised a hand, silencing Xylar before he could continue. "Ambassador, your concerns have been noted," the towering Krill rumbled. "However, actions speak louder than words. Humanity has demonstrated its capability to adapt and overcome. Perhaps it is time for all of us to reconsider preconceived notions. The statement drew murmurs of agreement from several delegates, particularly Ambassador Scylla, who floated gracefully toward the center of the platform. Her translucent form shimmered faintly as she addressed the council. "I must admit I find humanity's approach intriguing," she said, her melodic voice carrying across the chamber. "Their reliance on strategy over sheer power reminds me of our own early struggles as a species. Perhaps there is wisdom in simplicity." Her words seemed to soften the mood slightly, but Xylar wasn't done yet. Stepping forward again, he pointed an accusing claw at Bill. "Wisdom? You call this wisdom? Their methods are primitive, outdated. If we are to maintain order in the galaxy, we cannot afford to place trust in those who refuse to evolve." Bill leaned forward, his steel gray eyes locking onto Xylar. "Evolve?" he asked, his tone measured but firm. "Tell me, Ambassador, how many wars has your kind fought and lost because you relied too much on fancy gadgets and forgot the basics? Evolution isn't about replacing old ways with new ones. It's about learning when to use both." Xylar bristled visibly, his mandibles twitching in irritation. Before he could respond, Chancellor Vorak intervened once more. "Enough," he declared, his deep voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "This session has devolved into petty squabbles. Let us refocus on the task at hand, addressing the growing instability in the outer rim. Unless anyone has concrete evidence to present, I suggest we move forward constructively." The room fell silent as delegates exchanged uneasy glances. No one spoke, but Bill noticed something telling, a flicker of hesitation in Xylar's otherwise confident demeanor. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it caught Bill's attention. Whatever was happening in the outer rim, Xylar seemed unusually invested in keeping it hidden. After a pause, a representative from the Thalaxians stood up. Unlike the Zerathians or Valens, the Thalaxians were humanoid in appearance, though their skin shimmered with iridescent hues that shifted depending on the light. Their ambassador, a tall figure named Kalos, addressed the council. "We propose sending a delegation to investigate the unrest in the outer rim," he said smoothly. "If tensions are indeed rising, we must act swiftly to prevent escalation." It sounded reasonable enough, but Bill's instincts told him otherwise. He glanced at Maggie and Bob, both of whom shared his skepticism. Delegations often served as cover for ulterior motives, and given the current atmosphere, this proposal felt suspiciously convenient. "Who would lead this delegation?" Chancellor Vorak asked, his glowing red eyes scanning the room. Kalos hesitated for a fraction of a second before replying. "Given humanity's recent display of resourcefulness, perhaps they could contribute meaningfully to the effort." The suggestion drew sharp reactions from the crowd. Some delegates nodded approvingly while others scowled openly. Bill straightened in his seat, his mind racing. On the surface, Kalos's offer appeared neutral, even complimentary. But Bill had spent decades navigating political minefields during Earth's conflicts. He recognized the tactic, a way to put humanity in the spotlight, where any failure would reflect poorly on them. Beside him, Maggie leaned closer. "Trap," she whispered simply. Bill nodded. "Agreed. But if we refuse, it'll look like we're afraid." "So what do we do?" Bob asked, his deep voice barely audible. "We play along," Bill replied, his gaze fixed on Kalos. "For now." When Chancellor Vorak turned to the human representatives for their response, Bill stood slowly, drawing every eye in the room. "We accept," he said firmly. "If the Council believes our participation will help resolve this crisis, then we're ready to assist." His words earned a round of applause from some delegates, though others remained skeptical. Xylar watched silently, his expression unreadable behind layers of chitin. As Bill sat back down, Maggie raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this?" "No," Bill admitted quietly. "But it gives us a chance to dig deeper. Whatever's really going on out there, we won't figure it out sitting here." Later that evening, the three veterans gathered in their quarters to discuss their next steps. The room was dimly lit, with holographic maps of the outer rim projected onto the walls. Bob paced back and forth, his massive frame casting long shadows across the floor. "Something stinks about this whole thing," he growled. "Too convenient, too tidy." Maggie nodded, her sharp eyes scanning the maps. "Agreed. They're setting us up for something. Question is, what?" Bill leaned against the table, his arms crossed. "Could be anything. Blaming us for starting trouble, trying to make us look weak, or worse. But whatever it is, we need to stay 2 steps ahead." "And how do we do that?" Bob asked, stopping mid-pace. "By being smarter than they expect," Bill replied. "We start by gathering intel, find out what's really happening in the outer rim. If there's trouble brewing, we'll know before they can spring it on us." Maggie tapped a section of the map. "There's a mining outpost near the border. Been having supply shortages lately. Could be worth checking out." "Good idea," Bill said. "We'll head there first. Keep our eyes open for anything unusual." The following morning, the delegation assembled aboard a transport ship bound for the outer rim. Alongside Bill, Maggie, and Bob were representatives from the Zorathians, Valens, and Thalaxians, each accompanied by small security teams. Tensions ran high, with everyone aware of the stakes. Xylar, unsurprisingly, led the Zorathian contingent, his armored form radiating hostility. Ambassador Scylla floated serenely nearby, her presence calming despite the charged atmosphere. As the ship entered hyperspace, Bill took the opportunity to observe his fellow delegates. Most kept to themselves, exchanging polite but guarded pleasantries. Only Kalos seemed genuinely interested in engaging with the humans. During a brief conversation in the ship's common area, he approached Bill with a slight smile. "You handled yourself well back there," Kalos said, his shimmering skin catching the light. "Not many can stand toe-to-toe with Xylar and come out ahead." Bill shrugged. "Just doing my job." Kalos tilted his head, studying Bill closely. "Your kind fascinates me. So much passion, so much determination. It's rare to see in these times." "Is that supposed to be a compliment?" Bill asked, his tone neutral. "A mere observation," Kalos replied. "Though I suspect you'll need more than determination to survive what lies ahead." His words lingered in Bill's mind long after the conversation ended. Was Kalos warning them, or testing them? Either way, Bill knew they couldn't afford to let their guard down. The journey to the outer rim promised to be anything but straightforward. When the ship finally arrived at the mining outpost, the scene awaiting them was far from ordinary. The facility, which should have been bustling with activity, was eerily quiet. Workers milled about aimlessly, their faces etched with worry. Equipment lay scattered across the compound, some pieces damaged beyond repair. As the delegation disembarked, Bill immediately sensed something was wrong. "What happened here?" Maggie asked, her voice low as she scanned the area. Bob frowned. "Looks like they've been hit hard. But by what?" Bill's eyes narrowed as he spotted a group of workers huddled together near a storage unit. Motioning for Maggie and Bob to follow, he approached them cautiously. One of the workers, a wiry man with dirt-streaked clothes, looked up nervously as they approached. "You're not going to believe this," the worker said, his voice trembling. "They came out of nowhere. Ships we've never seen before." The mining outpost felt like a ghost town, its usual hum of activity replaced by an unsettling silence. Bill, Maggie, and Bob moved cautiously through the compound, their senses on high alert. The workers they had spoken to were visibly shaken, their eyes darting nervously toward the horizon, as if expecting another attack at any moment. Whatever, or whoever, had struck this place had left deep scars, both physical and psychological. As the delegation split into smaller groups to assess the damage, Bill made sure to keep his team close. He didn't trust the other species, representatives, especially Xylar, whose cold demeanor seemed even frostier than usual. The Zorathian ambassador kept his distance but watched the humans with an intensity that set Bill's instincts on edge. Something about this entire situation felt orchestrated, and Bill wasn't about to let his guard down. Maggie knelt beside a damaged piece of machinery, her sharp eyes scanning for clues. "This wasn't just vandalism," she said, running, her fingers over scorched metal. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were after. Bob nodded, his massive frame casting a shadow over the scene. Looks professional. Military-grade weapons, too. Not your average pirates. Bill crouched next to Maggie, his expression grim. Which means someone wanted to send a message. Question is, who and why? Their investigation led them to the Outpost's Central Control Hub, a small building filled with monitors and communication equipment. Most of the systems were offline, but one terminal flickered weakly, displaying fragments of data. Maggie quickly went to work, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she tried to recover whatever information was still intact. After a few tense minutes, she leaned back with a satisfied grunt. "Got something," she announced. "Logs from before the attack. Looks like they detected unidentified ships entering the system about 3 days ago. No registration tags, no transmissions, just showed up out of nowhere." Bill frowned. Unregistered ships? That doesn't sound like rogue scavengers. More like someone trying to stay hidden. Or someone who doesn't care if they're seen, Bob added darkly. If they're hitting places like this, they're not worried about being subtle. Maggie pulled up another file, her brow furrowing as she read the contents. There's more. Reports of similar attacks on other outposts along the border. Same pattern. Hit fast. Take what they want. Leave nothing behind. Bill straightened, his mind racing. This wasn't random raiding. It was coordinated aggression. Someone was deliberately destabilizing the outer rim, creating chaos that could easily spiral into full-blown conflict. And given the timing of the Council's summons, it seemed unlikely to be a coincidence. "We need to find out who's behind this," Bill said firmly. "And fast. If word gets back to the Council, they'll use this as an excuse to escalate tensions." Maggie nodded. "Agreed. But we can't do it alone. We'll need help." Bill glanced around the compound, his eyes landing on Ambassador Scylla. The Velan representative had been observing the humans quietly, her translucent form shimmering faintly in the dim light. Unlike Xylar or Kalos, she hadn't shown any hostility or much interest at all. But Bill sensed there was more to her than met the eye. "Let's talk to Scylla," he suggested. "She might know something." Approaching the Velan ambassador proved easier than expected. Scylla floated gracefully toward them, her melodic voice carrying a note of curiosity. "You seem troubled," she observed. "Have you discovered something?" Bill hesitated, weighing his words carefully. "We found evidence of coordinated attacks on outposts along the border. It's not random. It's deliberate. Someone's trying to stir up trouble." Scylla's glowing eyes narrowed slightly. "That is troubling indeed. Such actions could ignite war if left unchecked." "Exactly," Bill replied. "Which is why we need to figure out who's responsible. Do you have any leads?" Scylla paused, her form rippling softly as though considering her response. "I cannot say for certain," she admitted. "But I have heard whispers among my people. Rumors of a faction within the Council orchestrating these events to weaken weaker species." "A faction?" Maggie asked sharply. "Who?" "I do not know," Scylla said. "But if such a group exists, they will stop at nothing to achieve their goals." The revelation sent a chill down Bill's spine. If a rogue faction within the Council was behind the attacks, it meant the threat ran deeper than anyone had anticipated. Whoever was pulling the strings wasn't just targeting humanity. They were playing a dangerous game with the entire galaxy. "Thanks for the info," Bill said, nodding to Scylla. "We'll look into it." As they walked away, Bob glanced over, his shoulder at the Velan ambassador. "Think we can trust her?" "She's got no reason to lie," Maggie replied. "Besides, her people aren't exactly fans of the Council either. They've got as much to lose as we do." Bill nodded thoughtfully. "Even so, we can't rely on rumors alone. We need proof." Their search for answers continued throughout the day, leading them to a storage facility where supplies had been stockpiled before the attack. Inside, they found crates marked with unfamiliar symbols that none of the workers recognized. Maggie snapped a photo of one of the markings, her expression thoughtful. "These don't match anything I've seen before," she muttered. Could be a new player in the game, or an old one hiding in plain sight, Bill countered. Either way, we need to trace them. By evening, the delegation reconvened in the outpost's main hall to share their findings. Xyler took the floor first, his tone dismissive as always. The humans claim there is evidence of organized sabotage, he sneered, yet all they offer are vague theories and unverified reports. Bill stepped forward, his voice steady despite the jab. We're not asking you to take our word for it, look at the facts. Outposts across the border are being targeted systematically. Supplies are being stolen, equipment destroyed, and civilians abducted. Does that sound like random piracy to you? Kalos raised a hand, cutting off Xylar's retort. He raises a valid point, the Thalaxian ambassador said smoothly. Such precision suggests intent. Perhaps we should consider the possibility of a larger conspiracy. Xylar bristled visibly. A conspiracy? Preposterous. You would accuse fellow council members based on hearsay? No accusations, Bill interjected. Just questions. Someone out there is sowing discord. If we don't act now, it could tear the galaxy apart. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Chancellor Vorak, who had remained silent until now, rose to his towering height. His glowing red eyes swept across the room, commanding attention. The human representative makes a compelling argument, he rumbled. If there is truth to these claims, we must uncover it swiftly. I propose expanding our investigation beyond this outpost. Each species shall contribute resources to track down those responsible. The decision drew mixed reactions. Some delegates nodded approvingly, while others exchanged wary glances. Xylar, however, looked almost nervous. It was fleeting, but Bill caught it, a flicker of unease beneath the Zorathian's armor-plated exterior. After the meeting adjourned, Bill pulled Maggie and Bob aside. Did you see that? He asked quietly. Yeah, Maggie replied. Xylar didn't like that plan one bit. Makes you wonder why, Bob added, cracking his knuckles. What's he hiding? Bill's jaw tightened. Whatever it is, we're going to find out. Tomorrow we start digging deeper, and this time we don't stop until we get answers. That night, as the outpost settled into an uneasy quiet, Bill sat alone in the dimly lit common area, staring at the photos Maggie had taken earlier. The strange symbols stared back at him, taunting him with their mystery. He knew they were pieces of a puzzle, one that could unravel the truth about the attacks and the shadowy forces behind them. Beside him, Maggie joined him with 2 steaming cups of synthetic coffee. She handed one to Bill before sitting down. Still thinking about those symbols, Bill nodded. They're the key. If we can decode them, we might be able to trace whoever's responsible. Maggie sipped her coffee, her sharp eyes narrowing. It won't be easy. Could take days, maybe weeks. We don't have weeks, Bill replied. But we'll make it work, one step at a time. As the hours passed, the veterans worked tirelessly, piecing together fragments of data and cross-referencing the symbols against known galactic databases. By dawn, they had made a breakthrough. The markings matched records of a secretive organization rumored to operate on the fringes of council-controlled space. An organization with ties to powerful figures within the council itself. This is it, Maggie whispered, her voice tinged with both triumph and dread. We found them. Bill leaned back in his chair, exhaustion etched into his weathered face. Now comes the hard part, taking them down. For the first time since arriving at the outpost, Bill allowed himself a small smile. They were closer than ever to uncovering the truth and exposing the rot at the heart of the Galactic Council. But as he well knew, the fight was far from over. The discovery of the mysterious symbols and their connection to a secretive organization sent a jolt of determination through Bill, Maggie, and Bob. They knew they were onto something big, something that could shake the foundations of the Galactic Council. But uncovering the truth wasn't going to be easy. Every step forward felt like walking into a web of lies, where one wrong move could trap them completely. By mid-morning, the delegation had split again to gather more information. While Xylar and his Zorathian team scoured the outpost for salvageable tech, Kalos led his Thalaxians in mapping potential routes used by the attackers. Ambassador Scylla stayed behind, her fluid form gliding silently as she observed everything with quiet curiosity. Meanwhile, Bill, Maggie, and Bob focused on decoding the symbols further, hoping to find a lead that would take them closer to the shadowy group pulling the strings. Maggie sat hunched over a portable terminal, her fingers tapping rapidly against the keyboard. The glow of the screen illuminated her face, highlighting the intensity in her sharp eyes. "These symbols aren't just random," she muttered. "They're part of a larger code, a cipher." Bob leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the screen. "Cipher? You mean like secret messages?" "Exactly," Maggie replied without looking up. "Whoever made these wanted to hide their tracks. Problem is, they didn't count on us finding this." Bill paced nearby, his mind racing. "If we crack it, we might get coordinates or intel on their next target, but we need to hurry. If they hit another outpost, we'll lose our chance." Hours passed as Maggie worked tirelessly, her focus unwavering. Finally, she let out a triumphant sigh. "Got it!" she exclaimed, spinning the terminal around so Bill and Bob could see. On the screen was a map of the outer rim, dotted with red markers indicating locations that matched the pattern of recent attacks. One marker blinked steadily, a site labeled Delta 7 Mining Hub. "That's their next target," Maggie said confidently. "And if we're right, they'll strike soon." Bill studied the map, his expression grim. "Then we need to beat them there. Warn the miners, set up defenses, and catch them in the act." Bob cracked his knuckles, a determined grin spreading across his face. "Sounds like a plan. Let's give these cowards a taste of humanity's grit." Before heading out, Bill decided to inform Chancellor Vorak about their findings. He knew the council wouldn't approve of independent action, but keeping them in the dark entirely risked losing what little trust they had earned. Walking into the makeshift command center, he found Vorak standing tall, his obsidian-like skin gleaming under the artificial lights. "Chancellor," Bill began, his voice firm but respectful, "we've uncovered evidence pointing to an imminent attack on Delta 7 Mining Hub. If we don't act quickly, it could result in significant loss of life and escalate tensions even further." Vorak's glowing red eyes fixed on Bill, unreadable yet piercing. "You are certain of this?" he asked, his deep voice reverberating through the room. "As certain as we can be," Bill replied. "We believe a rogue faction within the council may be involved. This isn't just piracy. It's sabotage designed to destabilize the region." For a moment, Vorak said nothing, his towering form casting a long shadow over the chamber. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Very well. Proceed with caution. Report back once you have secured the area." As Bill left the command center, he couldn't shake the feeling that Vorak already suspected something, or someone, but chose not to say it outright. Whatever the Chancellor's thoughts, Bill knew they were on their own now. It was up to them to stop the attackers and expose the truth. The journey to Delta 7 Mining Hub was tense. The transport ship carrying Bill, Maggie, and Bob cut through the void of space, its engines humming softly. Outside the viewport, stars streaked, past like streaks of light, each one a reminder of how vast and dangerous the galaxy truly was. Inside, the trio prepared for what lay ahead. "Weapons check," Maggie said, handing rifles to both Bill and Bob. "Standard issue, but loaded with armor-piercing rounds. Should hold up against whatever they throw at us." Bob slung his rifle over his shoulder, patting a pouch filled with explosives. "Always good to have backup plans," he said with a wink. Bill adjusted his holster, his movements deliberate. "Remember, this isn't just about stopping them. We need proof. Who they are, who they work for. Without that, we're back to square one." When they arrived at Delta 7, the mining hub looked eerily similar to the previous outpost, quiet, desolate, and seemingly abandoned. Workers milled about nervously, their faces pale with fear. A foreman approached the veterans, wringing his hands anxiously. "You're here about the rumors, aren't you?" he asked, his voice trembling. We've heard stories from other hubs. Ships coming out of nowhere, taking everything. People disappearing. We're here to make sure that doesn't happen to you, Bill assured him. But we'll need your help. Arm everyone who can fight. Set up barricades. And stay alert. The foreman nodded, relief washing over his features. Thank you, we'll do whatever it takes. As night fell over the mining hub, the veterans took their positions, blending into the shadows. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of metal or distant hum of machinery. Maggie perched atop a stack of crates, her sniper rifle ready. Bob crouched near the main entrance, explosives primed and waiting. Bill stood in the middle, scanning the horizon with binoculars. They'll come, Bill whispered into his comm unit. Just wait. Time seemed to crawl, each second stretching endlessly. Then, finally, movement. Dark shapes appeared on the edge of the compound, ships descending silently, their hulls matte black to avoid detection. Figures clad in sleek armored suits disembarked, moving with precision and purpose. They weren't pirates. They were soldiers, highly trained and equipped with advanced weaponry. Maggie's voice crackled over the comm. Targets inbound. 12. Hostiles, maybe more. Armed to the teeth. Hold your fire, Bill ordered. Let them think they've got the upper hand. The attackers moved swiftly, fanning out to secure the perimeter. Their leader, a tall figure with a visored helmet, gestured for his team to begin looting supplies. As they worked, Bill signaled for Maggie and Bob to prepare. Now, Bill said sharply. Maggie fired first, her shot ringing out like thunder. One of the attackers crumpled instantly, caught off guard. Chaos erupted as the remaining hostiles scrambled for cover, returning fire with energy weapons that lit up the darkness. Bob detonated a series of charges near the entrance, creating a wall of debris that blocked reinforcements. Bill charged forward, firing bursts of controlled shots to keep the attackers pinned down. His movements were calculated, decades of experience, guiding every step. Maggie continued picking off targets from above, her aim unerring. Bob joined the fray, tossing grenades that sent shockwaves rippling through the compound. Despite being outnumbered, the veterans held their ground. Their tactics, simple yet effective, turned the tide of battle. The attackers, accustomed to overwhelming weaker opponents, struggled to adapt to the humans' relentless assault. Finally, the leader raised a hand, signaling retreat. His voice came through a distorted speaker. Fall back, fall back. As the remaining attackers fled toward their ships, Bill shouted, Don't let them escape, we need answers. Maggie fired another round, disabling one of the ships. Bob sprinted after the retreating figures, tackling the leader to the ground. With a swift motion, he ripped off the helmet, revealing a human face beneath. You? Bill growled, recognizing the man immediately. It was a former council operative, a traitor thought long dead. The man smirked, blood trickling from his lip. You think this is over? You're too late. The galaxy will burn. Bill grabbed him by the collar, his voice low and dangerous. Not while we're still standing. With the leader captured and the attack thwarted, the veterans regrouped, breathing heavily but victorious. They had stopped the raiders, but more importantly, they had proof. Proof that someone within the council was orchestrating these attacks. Proof that the galaxy's greatest threat wasn't external, but internal. As dawn broke over Delta 7, casting golden light across the battered compound, Bill turned to Maggie and Bob. This changes everything, he said quietly. Now we take the fight to them.